Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have my September wrap-up. So I'm actually filming this all in one take, except for a handful of books that I hope to finish in the next few days. I'm actually filming this about 5 days before the end of the month, so I hope to have 3 more books to talk to you about. So I'll come in at the end of the video with that. Now, September was a much slower reading month for me because school's back in session, lots of events coming on, and I also tackled some really big books, as I mentioned in my TBR video. So without further ado, here are the books that I read in the month of September. If I remembered what roles I rolled on Bookopoly-thon to get them, I would mention them because I did pick this TBR through participating in Becca's Bookopoly-thon. I don't remember any of those. So I'll just be talking about the books. I'll talk about them briefly, and I will link the vlogs that I mention in the description down below. So to start off, we have El Soñador. I actually finished this at the beginning of the month, read most of it in August. This is a second read for me. I read it first in English and absolutely loved it. It is a fictionalized story biography of Pablo Neruda, who is an incredibly talented poet. I think part of what brought down my experience in this was reading it slower and piecemeal because it doesn't really have a plot. It's a biography. So I enjoyed it, and it was quick reading for me, helped me with my Spanish, but I would say read it in English, or if you are fluent in Spanish, read it a lot quicker than I did. Next we have Violet Made of Thorns. I had to decide which of the 2 books I received in book boxes I was going to read, and so I chose this one. I wanted to be able to keep it because it's absolutely gorgeous. Ultimately, however, this book let me down. This book had a lot going for it, but there was several fits and starts that continually brought me out of the narrative. I ended up not really enjoying it all that much. I rated it 3.5 stars. And I will be unhauling this one as well. Stay tuned for an unhaul video coming eventually. On the heels of that one, I was a little nervous to pick up Together We Burn, but I'm so glad that I followed that one up with this book. It's not a perfect book. It's incredibly tropey, but I loved every second of it. It's set in a fictionalized, a fantasy Spain, Hispania, and they fight dragons instead of bulls. Feel good ride. I rated it a really high 4 stars, not quite a 4.5 stars, but this will definitely be staying in my collection. Next, I read the 3rd book in the Alcatraz vs. the Evil Librarians series, The Knights of Crystallia. I read this one via audiobook and really enjoyed that experience. It's a fantastic narrator. In this book, Alcatraz goes back to his homeland, not Crystallia, that's where the Tristan Knights are from. I forget the name of their kingdom that they are from, and it's a really good exploration of character and character growth in this book. Hands down, it's my favorite so far. The next set of books I read on the first Saturday of the month, in which I participated in one of the Pokeathon gyms, as I am a Patreon of JD Rereads. First of those, we have They Call Us Enemy by George Takei. I thought this was an absolutely fantastic graphic memoir. I'm quickly becoming a fan of graphic memoirs. The art is stunning. The way that Takei weaves together history and memory, magnificent. I highly recommend this book. Next, I read this poetry collection. It is a self-published poetry collection by a friend of mine that I used to work with. I won't talk too long about it. I've discovered that poetry collections are not necessarily my favorite. I enjoy novels and verses, but not necessarily poetry collections, but I do still recommend it if you enjoy poetry. She's very talented. The 3rd book that I read in that 24-hour readathon is Class Act, which is the 2nd book in the New Kid series. I thought it was a companion novel. It is more like a sequel, but you don't lose anything by not reading the first in this. I think Jerry Craft touches on a lot of really important issues. It's sort of day in the life, exploring what it is like for these different kids as they are attending a primarily white institution. It definitely motivated me to pick up New Kid for sure. Then we had one of my favorite reads of the month. it's hands down one of my absolute favorites, and it is the graphic novel adaptation of Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. I really need to get on with the rest of the books in that series. Unlike the Legend adaptation, which was not great, this one was phenomenal. The artistry, really well done, captures a lot of the book, and I think extends the audience of this book to a group of readers that might be reluctant to pick up the book otherwise. One of my favorite graphic novels ever. Then we go to the final book that I read on that Pokeathon Gym day, which was a really intriguing read. It was one of my comics subscriptions. It was a collection of short stories in graphic form. I really enjoyed the absurdism of these stories, all except for the last two, which thankfully were very short and included some not so great things in it that I don't prefer. I will still be keeping this because I enjoyed the absurdism and it's out of my comfort zone. If I reread it, I will not read those last stories. Then we move on to the rest of the books that I read this month, and we have Ballad and Dagger. I tried to read this on the Pokeathon Gym day, but ended up finishing it 2 days later. This is the first YA edition of the Rick Riordan Imprints publishing house. Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I would classify it as fantasy. However, it has very real magical realism vibes. If San Madrigal, the homeland talked about in this book, were real, then this would definitely be magical realism. I really enjoyed it. I just wish that Older had chosen to use third person limited instead of first person. I think it would have bumped the book up even farther. Definitely looking into his backlist. Second half of the month was a slog, and that was primarily because of two books. First of which is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I have discovered that space operas probably not for me, and that it's really important, if it's a male author writing a female main character, for them to get sensitivity readers, you know, like women reading it to see if it's realistic. So I will not be continuing on in this series. This took way too long to finish, and I read it as an audiobook. On the other hand, I followed that up with another sci-fi read, and this is one that I didn't know that if I would like, and this is a sci-fi thriller, and I loved it. I thought that Sarah Gailey presented a fantastic twist on the whole domestic thriller or husbands cheating, etc. trope. I don't read a lot of thrillers, but I liked the addition of the aspect of cloning, which that's what the main character does for work. She researches into cloning, and I read this so quickly and loved it. This is the type of science fiction that I like. The other slog, just because of the nature of the book, is Veil. This one I will be keeping. It looks like a library book because it used to be, but I got it from the really big, really cheap, really good book sale back at the beginning of August. This is one of Bob Woodward's investigative journalist books, and it is about the secret wars of the CIA. I learned a lot from this. It took forever to get through because it was so dense, and I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of people, but I'm so glad that I read it. The last of the books that I'll talk about in this section before coming on in however long for me, but momentarily for you, is Siren Queen by Niveau. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to. Again, it's very similar to Echo Wife. I knew there were some things in there that I had the possibility not to like. They were outside of my comfort zone and I hadn't tried it out yet, but it's like what you tell kids who say that they don't like a particular food, like, well, try it first. You have to try it before you say you don't like it. And the magic, this is the epitome of soft magic. Nothing is explained. And you would think for someone like me that I would not like that at all, but I loved it. I loved the way that she wove it in and made it like, this is the thing. You want to argue with it? Well, that's life. This is how it exists, and just take it at face value. And she used that to teach some pretty powerful lessons. I said in the reading blog that it's probably not the book for me. It's not a favorite for me like it has been for other people, but I'm definitely going to be holding on to it because it is a book out of my comfort zone and it stretched my reading taste, and it is written beautifully. So I'm back with the last few books for my September wrap up. Just like with August, I came within one book of finishing my TBR, but I did manage to start that last book in September, so doing not too shabby. I have 5 books to talk about in this last little bit of a wrap up, 4 of which I read after the last part. This one I didn't have stacked in my lovely little stack over here in my filming area, and I forgot to talk about it in the previous portion. And that is Dragonsong by Anne McCaffrey, and I think I'm going to be returning to Anne McCaffrey if I stumble across more of her books. I think that this is definitely a different style of fantasy than I have read before. I really like the progression of the character journey for Manoli. I think this was a win from the book haul, the really big, really cheap book haul. Next we have How I Shed My Skin by Jim Grimsley. This is a memoir published in 2015, and I think the writing was beautiful. Well executed. Grimsley is definitely good at his craft. However, it felt like a lot of grandstanding and making himself feel good for him always, even though he had a racist upbringing and he acknowledged that, always being one step out of step with everybody else. And then even though the subtitle is Unlearning the Racist Lessons of a Southern Childhood, he actually does not spend a lot of time in the actual unlearning. He spends a lot of time in how he learned all of those things, and then the rest of the time making himself feel good, I guess. So this was not a win from that. Next we have Saint by Adrienne Young. This is so far the one and only book that I have won on a Goodreads giveaway. This is highly anticipated because I absolutely love the duology for which this is a prequel. In fact, just off camera on that side of the young adult fantasy shelf, I have Fable and Namesake. This one I think suffers from some of the same things that I talked about with Concrete Rose, written by the same author. And it was good. I liked returning to the world, but it just felt like, here, let me write a novelized version of everything that I mentioned in the duology. Next we have Crime in Progress by Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch. I mentioned in the reading vlogs that the thing that really brought this book down was the fact that they chose to write it as if they were objective in this whole situation, when it says on the front cover, co-founders of Fusion GPS, and they write it in third person. If they had written it as almost like a memoir or their involvement, I think it would have come across a whole lot better and it would have made a whole lot more sense. They tried to have an air of objectivity in this that they clearly did not have. And for that reason, I will not be keeping this one. Lastly, the last book that I'm going to talk about this month, favorite book I read all month, Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I made it into the Stormlight archive. I don't know that I'm ever going to be making it out because this is amazing. There's so much planning, so much intricacy. The plot, phenomenal. Character work, phenomenal. I got to talk about this for a long time in 2 different reading vlogs because it took me so long to read. This is an amazing book, and it cements why Brandon Sanderson, one of my favorite authors. So on that high note, thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.